Hi, dear listeners, and welcome back to Blush and Bloom, the podcast where we talk about women's health, self-care, and everything in between. I'm your host, Gigi, founder of Asele, your space for cycle-aware and preventive care. I'm really glad you're here with me on this journey to unpack women's health and highlight the incredible things being built in this space. So let's get into today's episode. All right. Hi, Trina. Thank you so much for joining me on the Blush and Bloom podcast. So for those who are meeting you for the first time, how do you introduce yourself and the work you do?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Trine. I am sitting as the executive director at DanBAN, which for those of you who don't know what that is, that's Denmark's biggest network for business angels. So investors investing in startups, scale-ups, all these early stage companies with innovative ideas. So we have around 200 and 300 business angels in Denmark investing in all kinds of different things, also in health tech and life science. Big span of different interesting cases we get through the network every year. And my main focus, or DanBAN's main focus, is to connect the right founders with the right investors, so we get more successful funding rounds and see more successful startups grow. So that's what I spend my time on. I have a background from the ecosystem, have been on the founder side and on the investor side as well. And I have had my own business for a long time where I've helped founders getting investment ready, fundraising ready, and helping them with go-to-market strategies and so on. But my main focus is to help add some value to a really already booming Danish startup and investor ecosystem.
That's really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I have a follow-up question to this. So you've worn many hats. You've been a founder yourself, you're a consultant, you've been a mentor, you're a board member, investor, and now you're director of DanBAN. So is there something that connects all these roles for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to people and what I really like about the startup ecosystem. I actually had my first encounter with it when I was studying my bachelor's actually, and started my first company with one of my co-students, and got into this accelerator program, Copenhagen School of Entrepreneurship, and kind of dipped my toe in the water and found out it's a really, really cool ecosystem. We have a lot of great ecosystem players that all want the best for the startups and for the helping you on your journey. And I got really attracted to this mentality of everybody being in the same boat and having this energy. And when you talk to founders, there's just a passion in the eyes, there's a fire in the eyes, and I really love that. So after that, I've done a lot of different things, but the common denominator is early stage companies being close to founders and investors. As I grew more into the ecosystem, I came more on the investor side because I see that's also really where I can make a difference, actually pushing some funding after some of these great ideas. But yeah, what connects all these roles for me is the passion to build, the bridge between founders and startups and the investors on the other side, and then see if we can get more successful companies out there.
All right. That sounds really, really fun and incredible work. So you've supported founders across different industries. So is there something that you've learned from being so close to early stage startups?
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the ecosystem, they know this. When you look at startups, there's a lot of things you can look at, a lot of things you can assess a company on and whether you believe them or not. But for me, I found out that, the founders, the curiosity for new ideas and entrepreneurship and so on, and the founders, their mentality, their mindset, their resilience, and ability to execute almost always beats the perfect plan and the best idea, because you can have the best idea in the world, and if no one hears about it, but also if you don't actually execute on it, is not going to matter. So one of the main things I've learned is, the founding team. It sounds a bit cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. The founding team is alpha omega. You need to find someone that, one, they believe in the idea themselves. You might sit there as an investor or another player from the ecosystem and think, I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm not sure it's got it. But then you meet the founder, and if they manage to convince you that this can happen, that fire, you really need that, because it's going to be a hard journey for them. It's no joke to be a founder. So the resilience in the founding team and the ability to execute. So yeah, I think I've seen a lot of startups from a lot of different industries as well, and all the industries have their unique challenges. And of course, it's important with knowledge on that and the different verticals. But for me, it's you have all these different unique challenges, but the founder mindset is kind of universal, that they come in all different shapes and sizes, but they need to have that grit to actually stand the course.
I think you already responded to the next question I was going to ask you, because you said the ability to execute, to have grit, and the resilience to be able to adjust and adapt to new environments. But then is there anything else, any other values that guide when you're deciding which projects or founders that you're excited to support?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, there's, the standard stuff you look at, the product itself, the innovation, the scalability, business model, go to market, all these things. But again, the first thing I look at, and I think a lot of investors, especially when we're talking early stage investing, when there's not that many metrics to look at, it is the team, the founding team, and both in terms of, their ability to execute and all that, but also their mentality, how, like, to have some, some kind of honesty as well. Because when you go in as an investor, of course, it's the founder's job to sell you the idea, sell you the business, but you also need to leave with a feeling of like, okay, it's not just, crazy, crazy ambitions with nothing to actually back it up. There's also some kind of realism in it and some honesty and humility that is like, okay, we have big ambitions, but we're also willing to learn, and we're transparent in our communication. And I would always rather have authenticity rather than just ambitious goals that are unobtainable.
Okay, that makes sense, especially when you say authenticity. I'm curious about this because you know how, like, in the startup space, everybody likes seeing big numbers. Like, they want to know that this is something that can actually scale. So it tends to put pressure on the founders to increase or inflate numbers more than they ought to. What are your thoughts on this? Like, should founders be doing this and just, like, I can't remember what it's called, like pretending to be something you're not. I can't remember what it's called in this particular context. Like, should they do that? Is it worth it? Or is authenticity actually rewarded as a founder?
But I think it comes down to the individual founder and the case, because I would say in this, like, both in business angels and VCs, we see a lot of the hockey sticks. It's like you start here and then it just explodes, and you scale like crazy, and we become a unicorn. First things first is for the founder to actually figure out what is the right journey for them. It's not necessarily the VC journey. Maybe the best journey for them is actually to do, some people call it the zebra, but the kind of startup where you build it up, it becomes profitable, you build a team, you create some workplaces, and it's a sustainable business. And then you don't need the hockey stick if that's the journey, if that's not your ambition. But if that is your ambition, you need that level. You need to show the metrics. You need to prove to the VCs and the angels that invest in you that that's possible. But then your job is to not just have the hockey stick, but to back it up. And of course, everybody knows that investing in startups, and like when you have a startup and you have a budget and a forecast, it's all guesstimates. It's no one knows the future. We're still in the process of proving the business. But if you can if you can answer the tough questions when the investors start digging into, or not just investors, but anyone, customers, whatever, digging into like, okay, but what happens if we do this? Or have you thought about the cost of the technology you're building, or the cost of the legal aspects and the regulatory stuff, and like help you need from external sources? And if they actually have, a pretty sound idea and understanding of their own business, and they can back up the numbers, then it's completely fine that it's ambition, it's guesstimates, it's no guarantee. But for me, it's like I use the Excel sheet and the budget and forecast as a really good indicator of how well the founder know their own business and their own weaknesses, the blind spots, the places where a lot of founders get surprised about the costs. So it's not that it's necessary to have it. It's not that you should take it out. It really depends on the journey that you as a founder are going on. And then to make sure that the numbers you put in there, you can explain why they're there.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing that. As an investor, you also bring in this investor perspective. So how do you think women's health and femtech in general is perceived among investors? So
I think it's one of those topics that has been there for a while. And I still see a growing interest in the field. I see a massive opportunity in it. It's if you look at the market and the numbers on the potential, it still baffles me that it's seen as a niche market. It's like, how can it be a niche when it's half the population we're talking about? So I think historically it's been overlooked, and it's often seen as a niche. I see a growing interest in it, and I see that, the more we shed light on not just femtech and females and all that, but just like the market, the pure numbers on the potential for a financial business case, it's a very, very interesting market, because it is the market, the group there, or the end user does make up half of the population. So for me, I see more and more interest in it, but it is still a work, and there's still work to be done.
makes sense. Okay. So there have been a lot of debates about if the term FemTech is actually empowering or limiting for founders when
Yeah.
seeking funding. What is your perspective on this?
Yeah. So again, as I said, I think the fact that it's still seen, women and female founders for that matters as well, is seen as like an underrepresented minority. It's a bit misunderstood because again, we're half the population. When it comes to femtech, I think there's pros and cons to it because it is one of those, it's underfunded and we need to shed some light on it as a whole vertical of to invest in. We need to shed some light on how big of a potential people are missing out on if they overlook it. And we need to get more, funding that direction. And sometimes it's necessary to put a label on it and say, okay, here is a label that's easy to understand. It's femtech, it's, women's health. And then try and push, nudge investments that direction. But it can also box startups in a category where they become limited because there's also investors out there that are like, okay, is that just another hype? What is it actually? So I think in the ideal world, I would just call it like health tech, but solving problems for 50% of the population. So it's just like it's health tech with a massive market potential. But I think in the beginning, it's the same with any kind of when you look at the diversity as well. It's the same with whether you're talking founders or specific categories. In the beginning, when you see that there's an underfunded market and there's a need for we need more people here, we need more money here, we need more initiatives, more innovation. I think it's necessary in the beginning to label it something because then it's easier to attract the funding. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. So in a previous episode, I had a conversation with Jill, and she's also supporting founders, especially women's health founders. And she was talking about how when presenting a pitch deck, for example, something that she would like to see less of is women showing this metric that women are half of the population, hence they're building this, that it would be best if you're more specific about what you're building. So that was one thing I remembered. And I was hoping to get from you, what is something that you wish more women founders or femtech founders in general, not just women, would include more of when they're pitching their business?
The thing is, I've seen a lot of femtech founders pitch, and I actually, in general, been really, really impressed with how well they do it. And that's also, it goes back a little bit to our talk, our discussion about the label femtech, because I think it's the main thing is to not, it's fine to be labeled as a femtech, but once you're pitching, once you're doing your business models, once you're doing sales or you're talking to investors, that should not be the focal area. That's secondary. The main thing is to be very specific, like you are any other startup. You focus on you. What is the exact problem you're solving? And what is your solution and what's the business model for it? So basically my advice to founders within the femtech space is to pitch it as if you were any other founder. It would be the same advice to anyone. Focus on the key metrics, what makes your company special. And again, prove to the investors, she also mentioned, because that's a really good point, is prove to them that it's not, just because now there's some buzz and hype about it. So now we're targeting 50%. It's that is why femtech has a reason to exist and why it's justified. But your specific business is solving one or more problem. But what is it that specific business is solving? Why is that relevant? And why are people willing to pay for it? Because again, it's like if you had any other business and came to an investor and said, I want to target half of the population, or I want to target, everybody in the age group above 18 years old. You would also get the same critique that's too bright, broad is too, we need to be more concrete. And that goes also for femtech. I would assess it as any other business. Just the best advice to just focus on the business, what makes it special, what makes people want to pay for it, and then sell it that way.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So DanBAN recently launched this new formats. Hopefully I got this right. New formats and networks, including health tech. So why do you think it's important to create these specific focused spaces?
I think it's because we've seen a lot of, again, first of all, it's when we are 250, 300 members, it's hard to make it relevant. When we have events, when we have communication, it's hard to make it relevant for everybody. But if we try and narrow it down into subcategories, we can kind of go more into interests instead and say, okay, we have some people that are interested in this field. That means if we put startups, their direction that fit their profile and their interest, there's a much higher likability, likelihood that they're going to get funded. And also, if you have a case that's a classic SaaS B2B startup, and then they're pitching to the same group of investors that are, health tech, deep tech case on the other side, if it's the same group of investors you invest to, you do risk that you get the same questions. It's like, okay, but they have like 3 million in revenue. Why don't you have anything, but your valuation is higher? And that's like, what you get if you don't fully understand the space, because health tech in general can be a little heavier on the research side, meaning it takes longer to get to profitability and commercialization. So it might be you're looking into a case where in 6 years we'll go to market. But the next 6 years is actually just development and pilots and clinical trials and so on. And to put that kind of case in front of someone who's expecting a revenue from day one can be really tricky, and it causes the wrong discussion, the wrong questions being asked. So if we categorize it a little more based on the vertical, we also see a little more quality in the dialogue between investors and founders. So we still have, our health tech cases still get exposure to our full network, but they get a little extra attention over in the healthcare segment.
Okay, that makes complete sense. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it also reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody as well that was a similar situation where with health tech, it's a bit different, and it's important to have somebody who understands those unique needs instead of putting too much pressure for you, but able to understand like where you're coming from and be able to even support you with their network to make things easier. Okay, so how do you see the role of angel investors in shaping not just financial outcomes, but also social outcomes in areas like women's health?
Well, I mean, obviously, I see it as a big role because most of these cases need funding and it needs to come from somewhere. And a lot of these cases are so early that it's very risky. There's a lot of risk attached to them. And that's oftentimes before a lot of the VCs step in. So I do see like angel investors in the very early phases has a really big role in making sure that more of these companies get funded. And then, of course, there's I would say a responsibility for the individual investor, but also for us as a network and some of the other ecosystem players as well, to make sure that they get exposed to a wide range of diverse startups. And I'm not just talking about verticals or industries, female founders, male founders, but just all in all, that they get, shown a lot of different startups, because otherwise a lot of these investors, it's like they have the best intentions. They would actually love to fund more female founders, more, underrepresented minorities. But if they don't see the cases, if they don't find them, it's hard for them to invest in them. So as a network and as a society, a lot of the ecosystem players, we have a responsibility to make sure that we also put in an effort to get more of these cases in the spotlight so that people know they're there. And because women also tend to sometimes fly a bit more under the radar, they're not as much like, they don't necessarily like all the spotlight. So then we might need to do a little more digging to find them and then present them to the investors. And then the individual investors, of course, need to, as much as they can, to try and put that bias behind them. But at the end of the day, that's just really hard, because if you have an example, if you have a company coming in and, pitching an idea for like that is to do with menopause or menstruation, that is a lot easier to pitch to a woman because she understands the problem. She understands the needs. She can relate to it. So that's not something about like bad intentions from a man not investing in it, but it's harder for him to fully comprehend how big of a problem that is for women. And the same goes the other way. Female investors would maybe also have a harder time understand something that's very tied to, to men. So I think there's some fundamental things that'll always be a little skewed, and that's why we also need to just recruit more women investors as well, so the level field, like both in boardrooms, in the investors, and in the founder community, that just more diversity all over the whole board.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think you basically responded almost to like everything from my next question. I was going to ask you, what shifts would you like to see in the European investment ecosystem to support femtech and health tech founders?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is. I would like to. It's a long process. I see a lot of things going the right direction, also because there's a lot of great initiatives and a lot of, in Danish we call them ildsjæle, so like fire souls. These really
Ooh.
passionate individuals that work really hard, whether it be for women founders or female investors or femtech or ethnic diversity. There's a lot of really great initiatives, and a lot of them get funded with soft funding. But I would love to see that we get a more organic development in this whole diversity debate, because as long as it's soft funded, at some point that runs out, that money runs out. And then if these initiatives just die, it'll be a big back, like a step back. But if we start seeing a more organic development, and like I'm already seeing it big time in Denmark, more and more women step up to the plate and become investors as well. More and more women start speaking loud about their startups. People that before might have been a bit more, they were working on it, but they didn't want to share it until they had succeeded. Now they're
Yeah.
starting to share more openly about their journeys and become like more focused on role models from all kinds of corners of the ecosystem. So I see there's already a big development coming, and it's a lot of stuff is happening. There's just still a long way to go. So I would just like for everybody, as long as there's still, the overall fundamental interest from majority of the ecosystem players to actually see this change, then I believe we are moving the right direction.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now, what are your thoughts on AI?
In what sense? That's very broad.
Okay. What are your thoughts on AI from an investor perspective?
I love AI. I use AI a lot, but I think from an
How?
investor perspective,
Yeah.
it's both like there's both from the investor side when you use it in your daily life to like assess cases and so on, but from the founders, like when you look at the startups using AI, I think it opens up so many possibilities and it makes it much more efficient. There are some pitfalls, and I think we're still just seeing the beginning of that.
Yeah.
But when I talk to founders, a lot of times I can see a lot of them in the risk of ending up, with some liability in terms of compliance, GDPR, all this stuff. So I see it as a massive help in getting more startups to where they need to go faster. But there's also a big need to educate more on the use of AI and the pitfalls, because as long as as soon as you open up for that, especially with agents, you do make yourself a lot more vulnerable. And when I look at cases that use AI or brand themselves as an AI business, for me, it's also important to kind of look under the hood and make sure, okay, you didn't just make a really nice package around ChatGPT. You're actually using it in a different way and know what it means, because it's very hyped and it's a buzzword. So a lot of companies, almost all companies use AI, but if they label it and they put it in there, I want to make sure that it's actually used in a proper way, and that they've allied themselves with some experts in the field when it comes to their liability and, all the regulatory requirements there are around it. Because it's still new. It's still there's a lot of stuff to come, but it's a lot of possibilities. It also makes it possible for more founders to actually build their MVP before fundraising. Because if you look 10 years back, I would see a lot of startups, and they would probably come and raise money to build their MVP. Now you can get really, really far with, if it's tech, then Lovable, all these, you can make a functional MVP and go out and fundraise just on that without any real coding skills. And then once you have the funding, you add the development. So it's opening up a lot more possibility to try more things off.
All right. Thank you. I also wanted to get what are investors using AI for? Are they using it to decide what kind of companies they see potential in and want to invest in? Because I've been talking to a lot of founders, and I understand from AI, from their perspective, they're using it to build this, they're using it to do that. But how are investors using it to decide, okay, this has more potential than this one?
I think for me personally, I use AI a lot in a lot of stuff that I do. I think I would still be a little scared to let AI make my decisions for me, because there's so many nuances in it. When you see a pitch deck, when you then talk to the founders, there's a lot of different things you need to bring in. What I really use it for a lot is to, fact check some stuff. Or if you get a pitch deck where it's like, we have no competitors. That's always an example that you use, like, no competitors. And then you can really fast just ask AI, okay, business within this space, what else is out there? And then get a proper factual, okay, there's a lot of competitors. So you have a bit more nuanced image of it. And the same when you go into due diligence to run checks on some of those, because there's so much data and so many data points when you do valuations, and it's such a hard space, and you can get a lot of really valuable, analysis from the rest of the market and from similar competitors, and the market potential, different stories and stuff. And there's so many startups now also actually doing AI targeted investors to help them screen and source and scout for startups. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways you can use it. I wouldn't rely 100% on it to make my decisions on what startups are the most potential, but you can get a good overall assessment in summary.
That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Okay, so if you had one piece of advice for women founders pitching to investors, especially if it's their first time, what would that be?
I know, I mean, it's easy to say, but I would say my advice would be to forget that they're a female investor in like pitching a FemTech case to whoever they're pitching it to, and just focus on the business and be like, okay, I am a founder and I know my shit and I got
Mhm.
it together and I believe in this 100%. This is the problem. This is how I'm solving it. And this is how I'm going to make money. And then, of course, there is bias out there and it is harder and the data shows it very clearly. But if you get too caught up in that, you can also easily get that mindset that you've already lost before you started. So my best advice would be just, treat it as this is your business and you know your stuff and you're going to kill it and then go out and pitch that.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. So we're headed towards the end of the podcast. So what excites you the most about the future of women's health innovation, and especially from where you sit as an investor and mentor?
Well, I think for me now, both from an investor perspective, but also as a woman, I think it's great to see that it is like a overlooked market. So the fact that there is so much research that has been done predominantly with men, meaning that
Mhm.
a lot of the modern medicine, the medications we take, the procedure, the treatments, and so on, are actually tested on men. And that means that they might not be as effective on women as they are in men. And to get some like level this field a little bit so that we get some more qualitative data to actually show, okay, where is it that we need to make some adjustments here? And then also just have a little more focus on some of these areas that might not be so sexy, like menopause and menstruation and all that. It's like women live it every single month. It's a cycle that starts and it ends and then starts over again. It's a pretty big thing. And if someone can come in and actually make that whole life cycle from like puberty to menopause, that's like just one area, right? But that
Mhm.
is one that's been so, I mean, it's like you don't talk about it because it's a little gross. And it's like, it's not. It's pretty natural. And I just like that it becomes more normal to see this. And when you go to like now Tech Barbecue, the big conference was last week where FemTech Studios and Danish Life Science Cluster had a big FemTech lounge. And it was awesome to see like the types of startups you saw there and the material they brought. It was just a whole different, it just felt okay, this I haven't seen before, this kind of solution. So it's like I'm really excited for that to just become more normal and just see more investments, more products, more, development in it.
All right. That's so exciting. So final two questions. What advice would you give, or general, what would you tell 15-year-old you?
15-year-old me, I would tell me to take some more development courses. I love, like, just actually, like, I don't care what business you're in, what industry you're in. I would have loved to be, I mean, I'm pretty techy and tech savvy, and I can do a lot of, stuff and learn by myself. But I would have loved to be able to actually go in and check, because so many startups, they are founded in technology, and to actually go in and have a better idea of like, okay, what's working and how stable is it and all this. So I feel like you're far ahead already if you are really good in development and understand that also just for common logic. It's a really good place. I mean, I signed my daughter up for robotics because I was like, you're 5 years old, but I think you would be benefiting from this.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. Okay. So finally, for people who want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Me personally, I am on LinkedIn. Trine Hoffensetz Winther is a little hard to spell.
In the links.
Exactly. DanBAN, we have a lot of stuff going on. We have around 80 events a year and a lot of startups coming through us, a lot of investors. So my days are very filled with DanBAN. So it's also, if you follow DanBAN on LinkedIn, and you can see more on our website, but on LinkedIn and Instagram for founders, we have a lot of stuff we're posting there and spreading the word and sharing news. And also just one part of it is, of course, what we do. Another part is more educational on like different master classes, different topics for the startup community to get a better insight in warrants, mergers, acquisitions, and in all these employee benefits and like all kinds of stuff within the startup ecosystem. So LinkedIn would be the best place to go.
Okay, thank you so much. I will include the links in the show notes and in the description for our viewers. So thank you so much, Trina. It's been a pleasure learning from you and all the incredible stuff you're doing for the Danish ecosystem. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Hi again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Blush and Bloom. I'm so glad you joined me for this conversation. If you found it helpful, please share this episode with a friend or someone who might need it. Let's keep talking about women's health and working towards better outcomes for all of us. You can find more episodes and resources at www.asele.tech and check out our app at www.asele.health. And you can follow us for more updates on Instagram at asele.tech. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and bye-bye.